every time I find myself in the back with a kid that really does not want to be there at church, I try to remember nowadays, what the nuns have said, like, this is where I am meant to be. This is my vocation. This is my call to prayer.
Hey, my friends, there's a lot of books written on motherhood, but you really want to, especially moms who are homeschooling moms or have been homeschooling moms, traditional moms, they really want to know good advice on mothering. How do you find it? You definitely don't look in your Today's Parent magazine or something like that. There is a new book out by Dr. Mary Elizabeth Cuff. She's a homeschooling mom, but she's also a PhD in American literature and classic rhetoric from the Catholic University of America. Now, she had a really interesting idea for doing a book on motherhood, and that was to talk to the heads of religious orders about motherhood. Now, you might think that's a little bit weird, but what can the mothers of religious orders share with moms? We're going to find out right now. Stay tuned for this episode of the John-Henry Westen Show.
This October 17th and 18th, we are going to be running Rome Life Forum in Exile. We're doing that in Kansas City, Missouri. This fine bishop, Bishop Joseph Strickland, sort of in exile, is going to be joining us there, as well as Dr. Janet Smith, as well as prophecy expert Xavier Aral, and many more, including a special guest. Hope to see you there.
Hope to see you there.
God bless you. RomeLifeForum.com. Sign up now.
Dr. Mary Elizabeth Cuff, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin, as we always do, with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Let me ask you just right off, what inspired you to do this kind of thing? It's a very interesting concept, but how did you get there?
It actually began at a playground a couple years ago. I was at a playground in town with a bunch of my mom friends. And, kids are running around having fun, and we're standing around talking. And all of a sudden, a Capuchin nun walks over. And you never see a Capuchin nun at a playground. And so I, went over, said hi. We started talking. Turns out she's the sister-in-law of one of the moms who was there, and she was back for a very brief visit. We started talking about contemplative religious life and, motherhood and, all these things that are just suddenly thrown into conjunction together at the playground. And she stops and says, contemplative nuns are the stay-at-home moms of the religious vocation. And I thought, oh my gosh, I never thought of that before. That's so true. What else do we have in common? And I started thinking about, what else do we have in common between those two vocations? And next thing you know, I have a list of questions I want to ask the contemplative stay-at-home moms about, and the book was born.
Tell us about some of the orders. I understand one of them that you interviewed was the order that's been in the news of late because of Sister Wilhelmina, who is cause up for sainthood and stuff like that. And if anybody doesn't know, the one whose body was exhumed found incorrupt. And it was interesting for our viewers, especially because she was from a traditional order, and she actually started her order as a traditional order. And that, of course, was a big hoopla while all the battle between tradition and non-tradition was going on. But tell us about the orders that you interviewed.
I worked with 5 different monastic communities. I kind of wanted to get the width and breadth of what the contemplative charism can look like. So I have the Gower Benedictines, as you said, famous for their incorrupt foundress, Mother Wilhelmina. I actually got them involved in the project before they exhumed her. And then halfway through the project, their Mother Superior sends me a letter and goes, sorry, it's taking me so long to get to your questions. I have an incorrupt foundress on my hands, and I've never had to deal with that before. And I said, take all the time you need. That sounds way more important than my questions. But so they're involved in the book. I also have Cistercian nuns from up in Wisconsin. I believe they're the only Cistercian nuns in North America. That was very exciting to get them involved. And then I have the Capuchins over here in Pennsylvania. They are involved in the book. They call themselves evangelical contemplative. So they different monastic traditions have different levels of cloister, and they have one of the lightest forms of cloister because they also do a lot of sort of teaching work, not as nuns in schools, but they sort of bring contemplation to parish life. So they're involved in the book as well. Then I also have the Roswell Poor Clares. Maybe some people will recognize them from Mother Mary Frances. And if they don't know Mother Mary Frances, they need to get to know Mother Mary Frances. She was one of their foundresses in the 30s, 40s. She was very famous in the 50s. She wrote a bunch of amazing and hilarious books about religious life. Then I also have the Byzantine Carmelites in the Pocono Mountains involved, an amazing order, only Byzantine Carmelites in the world, sort of a East meets West, magnificent place.
It's an interesting concept, the whole thing of going to nuns to learn about motherhood. You think, okay, in some ways you'd think, well, you'd go to the active orders because they're the ones out there in the community, you know, they'd be doing hospitals and stuff like that and teaching. And so moms would be really relating to that. But you chose the contemplative orders. Why is that?
So both the contemplative and the active nuns have a call to spiritual motherhood. That call looks very different. I was drawn to the contemplative nuns partially because we know so little about contemplative nuns. In the modern world, it's very rare to encounter them. You have to go to their monasteries most of the time in order to meet them. So a lot of people kind of forget that they're there, and yet they underpin the church because they are the ones praying unceaselessly for all of us, right? For the whole world. So it's a hidden motherhood. And that really appealed to me because motherhood in the modern world is increasingly sort of isolated and hidden. People don't like to talk about it. People don't like to advertise it or promote it. You know, if you are a woman, people want to know about your career. They want to know about what you're doing other than being a mom. And motherhood kind of gets short shrift. And especially for women who have chosen, that's sort of a hidden motherhood as well these days. And so I thought that there was a lot of sort of confluence there, a lot that they could offer us. It's also a lot easier to talk to active nuns as a lay person. So I feel like a lot of people have access to talk to active nuns about the wonderful contributions that they can give to us in our pursuit of our vocations. So this book was giving people a chance to look into the contemplative life and see the wealth of wisdom and advice that they have for us. Maybe the only place that most people could encounter that, unless they literally packed up and drove to a monastery thousands of miles away to say hi to the nuns.
You made that beautiful comparison right in the beginning when you first were inspired, where that nun came and told you, the contemplative nun, that they were sort of the stay-at-home moms of the religious community. I think that's beautiful. One of the other things that happens is, or at least in your book, Father John Hardin's quoted, talking about these families as sources of good vocations. What did he say there from the experience you got from or the advice you got from the contemplative sisters? How can families encourage vocations? I think a lot of people today would love to have their children, especially in big families, have their children take on religious life of some sort. How do we get there? Any advice from the book?
The sort of ending few sections, there's many little tiny chapters throughout the book that deal with different, common topics. I introduce the topic, I ask questions to the nuns, and then I record the nuns' actual responses. So it's their words in their voices throughout the book, answering the various questions that I have. The last few sections, I actually tackled this question directly. I asked the nuns, what can parents do, especially, what can mothers do? Because the book is, sort of focused on mothers. What can we do to cultivate our children's vocations? And sort of what about their own family life did they see as sort of instrumental to their own vocation? Lots of really good insight there. Father John Hardin connects the religious life to good family life. You need to have, every once in a while, you can, kind of be the exception that proves the rule, that someone who had an absolutely terrible family life, manages to push past that, in this amazing, individual act and be able to cultivate a good religious vocation. God's capable of everything, but more often than not, in Father Hardin's writings, and as the nuns say, good, strong, faithful families are sort of the nursery for a good religious vocation. The two vocations need each other. It's good families that create, for the most part, strong religious vocations. And the nuns said that really bears out in their experiences. Most of the nuns that I spoke to are Mother Superiors. They're the ones that meet prospective vocations and sort of shepherd their vocational discernment, both before the young woman enters the convent and also through that process as they determine, like, is this for her or not? And they said time and time again that, the vocations that they're getting are from large Catholic, often homeschool families, not necessarily homeschool families, but they said that homeschool really helps with religious vocations because the monastery is this collection of people of all ages, right? And a homeschool family is also a collection of many people of all ages working together on a common goal, right? So the structure of the homeschool life is in many ways sort of similar to the monastic life, in that there is this vast age range all working towards a particular project together. So I thought that was kind of cool. Something I didn't really think about before I started the book. Other nuns said things like, well, one Mother Superior in particular said that what is so key to a good religious vocation flourishing is a young person's relationship with their parents. When a young woman enters a monastery, she is entering as a daughter, a real daughter, not just, it's a term of endearment, right? It's a real daughter underneath a real mother in the monastery. And if she had a bad or competitive or fraught relationship with her own mother before entering the convent, that's going to sort of impact her relationship with her Mother Superior. So she said, mothers work very hard to foster a good, collaborative, loving relationship with your daughters, because it carries on into their vocation, once they leave, the home of the family. And she said that holds true too with fathers. She said that young women entering her monastery who struggle in their relationship with their fathers, she said the Our Father is a painful prayer. She said it's very important for mothers and fathers to cultivate the sort of relationship with their children that models, our Heavenly Mother, Mary, and our Heavenly Father, God, because it is so important in a young person's ability to encounter and fulfill their vocation.
It's interesting too. You've got this book is directed at mothers. I mean, today our culture is such that parents, whatever, it doesn't matter. It can be two men, can be two. You're focusing here specifically on mothers. Tell us the importance of mothers, while society is saying, it doesn't really matter.
Society likes to talk about the parents, right? And no, it's a mother and a father, and we cannot do each other's roles. The nuns and I talked about this at the beginning of the book, the unique nature of motherhood, the unique feminine quality of motherhood. Motherhood and fatherhood are different. They're both necessary, but they're different in that motherhood takes the unique nature of a woman and asks her to provide for those in her family, whether that's the spiritual family of the monastery or the physical family of the home. We are called to use our feminine genius in a way that a man just can't, right? And conversely, a man is called to use his masculine genius in a way that a woman can't, right? And for motherhood, what that means is that we are called to foster this nurturing world of love, right? In a way that's hard to describe in words, but when you see it in action, you can see it. It's there, right? The way that a woman fosters love in the home is a uniquely feminine aspect. It's something that only a woman can give, right? If you think about how that comes about, right, where women literally provide a womb for a baby to develop, right? This all surrounding, comfortable environment, right? And we are uniquely gifted with the ability to do that. And, someone will say, oh, I'm not maternal, I can't do that. We all have it in us somewhere, right? And if we focus on developing that according to our calling, it will come out, right? We have to find that in ourselves because it is there. It is an essential part of who we are. And we are called, in however God calls us to fulfill that universal call to motherhood, we are called to offer that gift for those in, the community that he has given us, whether that be, the children and the husband in the home or within the church at large.
If you can, give us an example of that outside of the, the birthing context, which where it's obvious, but more in the home example of what that looks like.
There's an example that I use in the book that I think is very beautiful, where a mother and a father, not exclusively, but our emphasis is more, a father is more sort of doctrinal in his emphasis, right? He's more logos centered, whereas a mother is it's more of an intuitive sort of presence centered. And how that impacts us in the home is that, a father's role is very sort of, I would say, pointed, or should be more pointed and more directed in this way, that way. Children often model their father's religious or lack of religious ideals. They more likely will model the fathers than the mothers. For a mother, I think what that means is that we have to create a presence, right? And that's why, various popes have talked about how it's wrong for societies to create a sort of environment where women are forced out of the home to work, because we are very much the heart of the home, right? And us being at home, not all the time, right? But us focusing on the home to create a comfortable home, to create a welcoming home for those who live there. That is, I would say, sort of bringing the concept of the womb into the home, right? The sort of the lifeblood, the beating heart of the home needs to be there at the home to cultivate it, right? So the home isn't simply like a house with beds and furniture and food, but has that sort of life pulse that only a mother can give.
It just occurs to me, and maybe it's peculiar to us, but I don't think so. The mom has it together it's like having it together for everybody. And we were a large family, we had 8 kids, but the mother's able to somehow provide for all in the family and know about what's going on with all. It is sort of like your example of the womb in that it's surrounded and the mom somehow knows what everyone needs. And more like informs when I'm needed to get something for someone. I'll do it, but I'm sort of told what it is. And it's very much, I think, pertinent to your example, at least that was my experience of it anyhow.
Well, if you think of Our Lady at Cana, right? She tells Jesus, hey, you're out of wine. That's what a mom does.
Yeah, exactly. Pope Pius XI said, men must look for the peace of Christ in the kingdom of Christ. And he urged that the faithful give public honor to Christ the King so that individuals and states would submit once more to the rule of their Savior. And that is why LifeSite News is raising up the image of Christ the King across the United States. And you can help us reach millions more. Please pledge your support today for these billboards at lifefunder.com/Christ is King. One of the things you must have learned from the nuns is how to pray for your children. And I think this is a big one for us because everybody is wondering, like, as the kids grow up, that's our state of life right now. A lot of them out of the home. That's huge. And these nuns, that's their focus. What'd you learn from them on praying for our children? And how do you argue with God saying, hello, you can't let go that quickly?
Prayer takes up a large part of the book, naturally. We talked about praying with children, praying distractions of children and of family life, right? And praying for our children. One thing that I thought was very powerful, I have 5 kids. They're all 8 and under. One thing I thought was very powerful was the idea that praying unceasingly, right? We think, oh yeah, nuns, they do that. They've got 5 hours of prayer each day, or sometimes 9 hours of prayer each day, depending upon the monastic tradition. They're always praying, and they always have the opportunity for prayer because that's literally their job, right? But they are also very surprisingly busy in the monastery. There's lots of things they have to do. And in between those hours of prayer as well, they are still called to pray unceasingly. And I always think to myself, or I did before I talked to the nuns, like, oh, that sounds nice. Who actually does that, right? Who can actually do that? The nuns' advice was really cool because it takes little things in your day that you didn't realize were an opportunity for prayer, and they sort of reorient your conception of prayer so that you find more opportunities that are already there, that are kind of banging on the doors of your head, and you just don't notice that they're prayer. So for instance, one of the nuns told me, like with little kids and with, praying unceasingly, she said the great benefit of monastic prayer is that they're constantly repeating the Psalms, right? Over and over and over again. She said the great benefit of that is you get an earbug, and, you're doing the dishes, or you're, doing whatever. In my case, I'm cleaning up the toys with my kids, and all of a sudden I realize, I'm humming a hymn, because it's an earbug, because I've been repeating it. I've been trying to incorporate this in our family life. So we've all been every single night saying Psalm 1 together as a family. And my 3-year-old the other day was picking up his toys, and I overheard him. He had an earbug. It was Psalm 1 was his earbug. And he didn't have all of the words in quite the right order, but that doesn't matter, right? That's another thing that the nuns emphasized was never pass judgment on the quality of your prayer, because what you think might be a poor showing on your part might be a treasure in God's eyes. It depends upon all sorts of factors that we aren't necessarily paying attention to. Like if we are desperately trying to pray and, there's a lot of distractions around, but we are trying to, maintain the prayer, or, it's really a prayer from the heart that maybe kind of got scattered around, as you're trying to do something and you keep losing focus, but you're because you're trying to maintain order in chaos and you're trying to pray, that can be an absolute treasure in God's eyes. Whereas, a perfectly articulated rosary that, you didn't really put your heart into, not as much maybe, right? Sort of looking for moments where prayer is sort of standing there waiting, ready for you, and pouncing on it, right? Because it's not a prayer if it just sits there and you don't do anything to it, right? So when my 3-year-old is jumbling through Psalm 1 and picking up his toys, I'm over there in the kitchen doing the dishes and I hear him. That becomes a moment where I can pray Psalm 1 too, because his earbug has called me to a moment of prayer. And we're united in our prayer, even though the 3-year-old hasn't noticed that, right? I have noticed that, and God has noticed that. So praying with our children in little moments, I think, is very important. Something the nuns emphasized, the community should pray together. The family should pray together, right? And then, when children grow up and leave the home, hopefully they continue that gift that we have given them. I'm still many years away from that, but we did talk about, praying for our children too is very important, because, God directs their steps. And, the nuns in the contemplative life, their purpose as spiritual mothers is to pray for, the children of God. And that means they're praying for our children, they're praying for us. And we can join our prayers to their prayers, as we pray for our children.
Here's an interesting thing I heard once from a priest, I believe. I can't even remember now, but he said, Jesus said in the scriptures, bring little children to me. One of the things that happens when you go to mass in your situation, it's hard. In fact, I used to joke with my wife, by the time the kids have finished fighting in the aisle and she's going up for Holy Communion, she feels she's been so angry, she perhaps should just ask for a blessing instead. Because,
I've been there.
No, it's hard. But the priest said, and I think it was so consoling, he said, no. Jesus wants you to bring little children. And with all that suffering and stuff you go through, he said, our Lord takes it as if you had the devotion of St. Teresa of Avila if you bring the kids. I thought, woo, that was beautiful. Did that sort of resonate with what you heard from the nuns?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The nuns said that, the key is to keep trying to find yourself in the presence of God, to enter into the presence of God in whatever God has called you to do, right? As part of your vocation. And we are most truly in his presence when we are, in church, but we can also find ways to enter into his presence throughout the day as we do the tasks that he has assigned us. And, especially for, trying to bring little kids to church and hoping that they, I feel like sometimes I'm dragging them to God kicking and screaming. But that's what I'm called to do as part of my vocation. So even if I'm not really experiencing Mass the way that I would like or my ideal, right? Being in the back with the little kid that I am, attempting to show God to, that is what I'm called to do in my vocation. And doing that in charity and in hope that it will get better, is entering into the presence of God, right? Every time I find myself in the back with a kid that really does not want to be there at church, I try to remember nowadays, what the nuns have said, like, this is where I am meant to be. This is my vocation. This is my call to prayer.
Imagine flipping the viewpoint for a second, and you're taking God's place for a minute. So instead of being the attendee at the party where you have to deal with your kid, you are there on the other end of the host of the party who's called you all there and is happy you're there. And he wants everybody to be there. And he sees you at the back, struggling to be there yourself, but also one of his most precious little ones with you. And he knows the struggle because he's God. He can see everything. Who is he most pleased by? The guy in the front sitting there, happily alone and whatever, able to do whatever. Or you, who is there trying your heart out to be there.
Right.
At least from my perspective, you'd be like, wow, that one back there, that one really loves me. So I think that's super beautiful. In your book, you talk about 3 types of martyrdom. Now, everybody's heard of, martyrdom of blood, and that's what makes sense. Some people have talked, especially recently, about a white martyrdom. What's this 3 types of martyrdom?
Yeah, so it actually comes from an early medieval Irish homily called the Cambrai homily. And the way that they divide this up, obviously red martyrdom, we all know what that is, needs no introduction. White martyrdom, traditionally in the early medieval understanding of martyrdom, is dying to the world in embrace of contemplation, right? So a white martyr, according to the medieval conception, is the martyrdom of a monk or a nun or a priest, giving up the world in order to pursue God. So a white martyrdom is a good, fulfilling religious vocation. And then the Cambrai homily, the Old Irish, which is what it's written in, doesn't have a distinction between blue and green. So they use whatever that word was to describe this third type of martyrdom. And some people call it a blue martyrdom. That's kind of more common. Some people, I think the Irish who like green, they say the green martyrdom. That's for lay people who want to follow God within the setting that he has given them, right? So a radical dying to my desire for the upholding of his will, right? So that is the martyrdom that is offered to lay people who have to be in the world, right? It would be wrong of me in my vocation to attempt to model too literally a monastic vocation. That isn't my vocation. My vocation is to be in the world, right? But I can still have a radical martyrdom by following my vocation. In that particular chapter, I talk about wedding crowns. It's an Eastern practice to be crowned with a wedding crown by the priest, and it's a crown of martyrdom, or dying to yourself by the embrace of your vocation. A lot of nuns also, when they take their final profession, they also receive a crown. Much more common in the Middle Ages, but there's still a lot of monastic communities. I think it's the poor Clares that are in the book. They have a crown of thorns that they are given. It's their crown of vocational martyrdom. So they have their white martyrdom. I have my blue martyrdom, or I should have my blue martyrdom, if I work to fulfill the radical call of my vocation.
We don't want to dissuade people from motherhood, but so tell us about the martyrdom as it plays out. Hey, it's hard to be a parent, it's hard to be a mom, it's hard to be dad. That much is known. What is it specific to this martyrdom? Because martyrdom sounds, I guess, to many people, oh, that's just death and that's just terrible. But it's not. It's beautiful. Tell us about the beauty.
What it is that you are dying to what you want, right? And that sounds awful, right? Oh, darn it, I can't do what I want. I can't go where I please. I oftentimes think of my little kids and their nap schedules or their bedtime schedules as sort of my movable cloister, right? You're at a family gathering that the kids have to go to bed. We gotta go, right? So it's all these limitations, and sometimes we can focus too much on the limitations as limitations and say to ourselves, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. The house is a mess. If only you guys would clean up and respect my stuff, then we could have a nice house, right? All those things that go into parenting children. And those are just the easy things, right? Then it gets harder from there. But the joy of it all is that, okay, I'm dying to myself. Who am I trying to follow instead? God, right? Okay, let's think about that for a second. He is the most perfect, the most good, the most wonderful, the most put together being ever, right? Okay, that doesn't sound so bad anymore, right? I mean, okay, not my fallen will, your perfect will. If I simply try to do what he wants, it's all going to come out all right in the end, right? Because he has the perfect plan. Better plan than I do, right? So if you think of the limitations and the sacrifices and the hardships as what they're intended to be, which is radical freedom, radical joy, and radical gift, they don't seem so dismal anymore. The nuns spoke to me a lot about how what they give up, they get back in a way that they didn't necessarily think they were going to when they gave it up, right? So I am called in vocation. The nuns are called in their vocation to surrender, to release, right? Not what I want, what you want. But he always finds a way to give it back in a way that's going to be better for me and in a way that's going to use my talents or my time better than I could have used it on my own. I just need to have the humility to recognize that and to accept the gift back when it is given. Actually, many of the nuns, they had these wonderful stories of like, when I entered the convent, I thought, I can't do this anymore. And then years later, they are called to engage in that talent again in a way that they would have never guessed, right? And I've noticed that as a parent, right? I have a PhD in literature, but I'm a stay-at-home mom. I'm not doing what academics typically do with their PhDs, but I use my PhD all the time, just not in ways I thought I was going to use it, but in honestly ways that are more fulfilling than what I could have gotten up to on my own. And that's kind of the joy of the sacrifice, the joy of the martyrdom. And if we read the accounts of the red martyrs, they don't go to their martyrdoms going, oh man, this is going to hurt. This is going to stink. I hate this. None of them say that. They're very excited. There's, stories of martyrs running to their martyrdom. I admit I don't do too much running towards mine, but I hope to.
Truth has a power of its own. It moves hearts and saves lives. I'm pleased to announce the launch of the new LSN TV app, which can bring all of LifeSite News' top video content direct to your phone, tablet, computer, and TV so that you can bypass the censors and keep fighting with us for life, faith, family, and freedom. Don't be alone in the darkness. We've been canceled. Fight the cancellation. Download the app. Mary, any final thoughts for moms and for what they can glean from the religious, from sisters, from Mother Superiors?
Yes, I think sort of the core that developed as I was asking these nuns for advice is the core of our calling, both lay mothers and the spiritual mothers in monasteries, is the call to model Our Lady. She is the source, the foundation of both of those vocations. She is the perfect mother, right? The mother of God. She models motherhood more perfectly than anyone ever has in all of history. And so much that she was made, and becoming, the queen of heaven and earth, she was made the mother of us all, right? So we are called to model her motherhood. Both nuns are called to model her motherhood, and lay mothers are called to model her motherhood. We are also called to model her other perfect calling. And she was the original nun, if you think about it, right? Her perpetual virginity and her constant contemplation of God, right, in his presence. And, lay mothers, we model that too, or we should model that too. So nuns model it most perfectly through their literal life, right? Lay mothers, we are called to model that according to our vocation, right? So, just as we model more concretely Our Lady's motherhood, right, her physical motherhood, and nuns concretely model her perpetual virginity, lay mothers also have a share in that part of the calling, in that we are also called to contemplate God and be in God's presence. And the nuns had many beautiful things to say about how to enter into the presence of God. My favorite was one nun said, if you're up late at night with a kid that can't go to sleep, that is an opportunity to enter into God's presence by contemplating Christ in the face of your child, right? And that's what Our Lady did, right? She was contemplating God in the face of her child because in her case, it's all right there. But in our case too, it is all right there too, right? Our children are made in the image and likeness of God. And we are called to model Our Lady in contemplating God, where he is manifesting himself in our children. And just the things that the nuns said about how to enter into contemplation of God in the little moments of our life, I thought was just so amazing. And I find myself trying to find little moments to do that now, now that I have their words buzzing around in my head.
Do you remember Mother Teresa used to say, how in the world does she go and pick up those like people who are dying in the street and they're smelling and they're like half dead already. And yet she's like loving to do this. She's smiling. She's cleaning them. She's such love in her eyes. She always said, because she sees Jesus in them, we can do that with our kids too. We can look at them in their faces and see Jesus in them and serve Jesus in them too.
And it's easier to not get too frustrated when you look in the face of your tantruming toddler and you see Jesus there and you're like, all right.
Mary Cuff, thank you so much for being with us, sharing with us your book. Where can people get your book? And Mother to Mother, where can people pick this up?
So Mother to Mother's Spiritual and Practical Wisdom from the Cloister to the Home. It's available now at tanbooks.com. It's available some other places too. So a lot of Catholic bookstores will have it on their shelves. If they don't have it physically on their shelves, they know where to order it. So if people are more of I want to go into a bookstore sort of person and it's not at your Catholic bookstore, you can ask them and they know where to get it. It's also on Amazon. Someone sent me a link to it. It's apparently at Walmart. I don't know if it's actually physically there at Walmart. I'm going to go and check because I'm curious. But tanbooks.com, Amazon, or your local Catholic bookstore will know how to get it.
Beautiful. Dr. Mary Cuff, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
God bless you. And God bless all of you. And we'll see you next time. Hi, everyone. This is John-Henry Westen. We hope you enjoyed this program. To see more like it, be sure to hit the subscribe button below to get all the latest content from LifeSite News. Check the links in the description to read more and connect with us on social media so that you can stay up to date with all the latest life, family, faith, and freedom news. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.